Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een, amma ba'd. So, before we begin, again we need to renew our intentions always. Whenever we're covering topics like this, we need to make sure that whatever we're doing for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So today we're going to be covering a few topics. The first is love of authority. This includes love of authority, love of status, love of position. Loving all of these things are very dangerous, and they can constitute being a disease of the heart. So we're going to look at them in detail. Why is it that people enjoy or want to have authority or have position or have influence over other people? Well, one of the reasons is because technically it's like possessing that person's heart. When you say possessing that person's heart, it means that you have a level of position or authority or control over them. And that's one of the reasons why people like to have that type of, wield that level of authority. They want to have a certain influence over other people. And the worldly benefit that you can get out of that is you can accomplish things that you would not have been able to accomplish had you not had that authority. So for example, why do people love wealth? Right? They love wealth, they love money, they love all these possessions because of what they can get out of it. So you can buy a lot of stuff. You can buy a nice home. You can you could get a lot of things that you want generally if you have a lot of wealth. Now what can you get when you have a lot of authority or a lot of position? You can get even more than that. In fact, there are things you can get which even money could not buy you. There are people would be willing to do certain things for you or for whatever you want, that even if you were to pay them, they would not have been able to do. So this is a reason why people crave and desire authority or status or position or all of these things, respect. But what they need to remember is that it's like wealth, in a sense, that when you die, what happens to all the wealth that you have? It's not yours anymore. It's transferred to somebody else. You can't take it with you once you're gone. So the same thing with authority. What is it going to do? It's not going to be able to have an effect. You're not going to have an effect over anybody else once you pass away. So that's going to end with death as well. And once you realize that it ends with death, then you have to think about, if this is not something that's very lasting, then why am I craving it so much? Why am I so obsessed about it? Why am I only thinking about this? And why is it so important to me? There's another thing we need to look at though. When we talk about needing or wanting authority, wanting status, wanting position, there is a level of authority that is needed, a level of fame or a level of reputation that's needed in order to function in life. So this is why it's a natural trait. Why do people naturally feel inclined to have some level of authority? It's because it's something that's ingrained in us that we actually need. So for example, we have hunger, right? We talked about hunger already. Why is it that we crave food? Why is it that we desire food? And what did we say? What was the reason? To nourish yourself, right? Otherwise, it's a survival trait. It's something that Allah has built within us when it's in the correct balance. The same thing when it comes to authority or respect. Everyone wants some level of authority, some level of fame, some level of respect because it's needed in life. You need it when you're dealing with other people. So you need to have some sort of reputation among your own family members. You're not supposed to be, you wouldn't want to be considered like the worst person in the world in their eyes. Otherwise that relationship is not going to be able to function properly. So that's understandable. That level is understandable. You would like to have some level of authority or respect in the eyes of your teacher, for example. So, wanting to, impress your teacher or wanting to have some level of status so at least they think you're a good student so that they'll maybe give you more attention or they're willing to speak to you or whatever. That's something that's natural. So wanting these type of things are natural. Wanting to have some level of status or authority in front of your employees, for example. If your fellow employees, or if you're a manager or people at work or whatever it may be, this is something that's natural as well. So wanting these type of things in order to help function in life is okay. That's not something that's looked down upon. It's not something that is worthy of blame. Now, once you cross this minimal limit, that's when it starts becoming a problem. Once you start desiring things above and beyond that, that's when it starts becoming a problem. There's another thing is that if you actually desire that authority for the sake of Allah, and meaning that you're doing it for the sake of achieving some type of aim that is in line with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants, then it can actually be praiseworthy. And we saw an example of this in another class that we were teaching. Which prophet asked for a level of authority? Yes, Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. Prophet Yusuf, peace be upon him. He asked for that level of authority in order to do what? In order to fulfill the needs of the people which needed to be fulfilled. Not for any personal gain. So he was not interested in wearing the clothing that position comes with. He was not interested in, getting to drink from the cup that position may come with. He was not interested in sitting in the chair that position may come with. He was only interested in serving the people. And for that aim, that can be a beneficial aim. But you need to be very, very careful. You need to be very careful, especially if you think you're doing it for the sake of Allah, and then you find yourself that a lot of people who thought they were doing something for the sake of Allah, they thought that, I'm putting myself forward for the sake of Allah so I can achieve this end. What usually ends up happening is their intention changes. And now they start realizing and they start making slogans. We are only doing this for the sake of Allah. But in reality, in the back of their mind, they're actually doing it for the sake of authority. They're doing it for the sake of their own position. So you need to be very, very careful about that before you become deluded. So most people will desire things for worldly purposes, and even the people who claim to be doing it for the sake of Allah, many of them are deluded and they're actually doing it for the sake of themselves. So what is the remedy for such people, or for such a illness, for such a disease? Well, let's take a look at the problem a little bit more in detail. You see, the thing is, the person who loves that status, they love to have that authority, they love to be high in the eyes of other people, then they start going out of their way to please other people. They start doing things. So they're always looking for things to raise their status in the eyes of other people. They'll adjust the way that they speak. They'll adjust the way that they stand. They'll adjust the way that they give attention to that specific person. They'll start complimenting and flattering that person. They'll start giving them maybe gifts. They're going to start putting so much time and attention and thinking always about ways in which they can become higher in the eyes of that person or in the eyes of a general group of people. So this person is always thinking, how can I become more and more popular? How can I elevate my status in front of these people? And what ends up happening is that this person will start doing something which goes against the teachings of Allah, which goes against Islam, in order to elevate their status. So they get to such a point where they're willing now to do anything, either to maintain their status or to elevate their status in the eyes of other people. And that's where the real danger starts. That's one danger. And the second danger is that you start showing off. So you start doing things only to show off to other people, not because you were planning on doing them in the first place. So this is a really big problem. The way you can test yourself, the way you know that it's starting to affect you, is you see how you react when people start criticizing you. When somebody starts saying, that person thinks that, he thinks he's so big, or she thinks she's so cool, or whatever it is, and they put you down, and all of a sudden this news reaches you. Now, how do you feel about that? Right? How do you feel about the news? Not just about the person. You can be sad about the person and thinking that, I really thought that this person was, someone who was my friend, or I thought that they were someone. But how do you feel about the news itself? If you start getting distressed, you start feeling sad, you start feeling, people are thinking that about me, you know that this is starting to affect you now. You know that it's getting in, and now you're starting to have this problem. So what will many people do? Many people will start going and doing things against Islam in order to restore their reputation. Like, for example, they'll lie about themselves. They no, really, I didn't come to the masjid because of such and such reason. I didn't make it for Fajr prayer because of such and such reason. That's not really the reason. But you go and you kind of twist something around, you make it into a lie in order to preserve your reputation. Or I didn't make it on time to that event because such and such thing had to happen. But you wanted to do it only to preserve your reputation, so you ended up lying. You ended up going and saying something wrong. You ended up blaming somebody else who wasn't to be blamed. The poor baby was crying or something like that. But in reality, it wasn't the baby's fault. Even if the baby wasn't crying, you wouldn't have come, or whatever it may be. So you start doing things in order to maintain your reputation or restore your reputation after it's been hurt. But you're doing those things against Islam. So this is a a big problem, and it's something that happens to a lot of people. Now, one of the ways to realize why you shouldn't be seeking this reputation, why you shouldn't be seeking this fame and all of these things, or how you can keep yourself away. Remember that every person who's famous, or every person who's really highly, highly respected in the eyes of other people, they're usually an object of envy of other people. So everyone's looking up to them and saying, you know what, I wish I had what they had. I wish I could have that status, or I wish I could have that position. And that's a very dangerous position to be in. It's not it's not the best position to be in. Although it may feel good, although you may be able to wield authority, at the same time there's a high level of danger that everyone wants to be in exactly your state. And they want to be in your state without you being in that state. That's envy, right? So you are an object of envy, and that should be a driving factor in reminding people that they need to be very, very careful of what they're craving and what they're desiring. Another thing you can do is remember that the person who's in a position of status or fame is someone who's constantly in fear of losing that position. Most people who fall into this category, they're constantly in fear that they're going to lose this position and they're not going to be able to maintain it anymore. So what do? It's something that's always preoccupying their minds. You know what? I have this many followers on Twitter. Or I have this many people who attend my lectures. Or I have this many people who call me up on a regular basis. This many people invite me in the summer, you know, when it's party time and there's walimas and there's gatherings and there's all these things. I get invited by this many people, by this class of people. And you're always thinking, you know what? What's going to happen if one of those people forget to invite me? Or they decide, you know what? It's an exclusive party. You didn't make the list. You didn't get invited. So now you start feeling bad. You start feeling upset. You start feeling, you know what? Oh man, well what if I lose the status? What if that person doesn't invite me? And now you start making a mess of your own life. You start getting stressed out because of these things. So you have to think about, one of the cures is, think about how people who are in that status actually feel. How they behave, how they're actually acting. Look at paparazzi, for example. You know, look at celebrities. They're followed and bombarded constantly by people trying to, you know, go around. I remember, for example, when I was in Egypt, I used to live next to Sami Yusuf. So Sami Yusuf at that time, he wasn't even as popular as he is now, but at that time he was still becoming popular. The thing is, the guy came to Egypt to learn Arabic. He wanted to be in a nice isolated place so he could focus. It just so happened that the marketing efforts were taking place right in Egypt at that time. And right outside his house, they had put up a billboard that he's having a tour coming up. Even though he's not even living there, he's just in and out for Arabic classes. He said it became so bad, he couldn't even go to the store to buy groceries. He'd go to the store to buy groceries and people would bombard him and he would try to cover his face. He said, I hate it. I can't stand living in Egypt. I wish there was an Arabic program I could go learn somewhere else. It becomes a curse for a lot of people. So it's something that, when you realize it's something that's bothering you, it's something that actually leads to these problems, you won't crave it as much. It's not always as nice as you think it is. So this is another way you can reflect upon this. Another thing is that think about people's hearts. The people who love you, right? The people who respect you, the people who admire you. If you look at all of them as a whole, people's hearts are very shaky. Right? One day they can like you, one day they can change all of a sudden. You say something that they don't like, you know, and then all of a sudden their heart starts changing towards you. I'll give you an example, you know, of Muslim, you know, scholars, you know, leaders. You say something that people don't like and all of a sudden they start criticizing you. So you say that, for example, you know, I think that, you know, this thing is halal. There's going to be a group of people say, I can't believe that Sheikh said it's halal. I thought I would respected him so much. Or if you say something is haram, I can't believe he's extreme like that. He said it's haram. All of a sudden you lost the respect of people now. The thing is, if you realize that people's opinions and people's hearts and people's inclinations of what they love and what they like and what they dislike, it changes and it fluctuates as a whole group so much. If it's so fast, then do you really think you're going to be able to have respect among all people? Are you really going to be able to get what you crave in getting this massive amount of respect and status and fame all in front of all these people? No, it's going to change. Imam Ghazali says it fluctuates like fire. It changes so quickly like this and that. It's wavering all over the place. So if you want fame and you want status and you want to be high in the eyes of other people, it's like building a house on the waves of the sea. There is no foundation. It's just going to be crashing all over the place. So wanting fame and desiring these things is not something where you're going to ever be secure in. You're always going to have a sense of insecurity, because you're never going to be able to guarantee and ensure that you maintain this status in the eyes of people. So it's something that you should be very, very careful about. Then another way to fix it, or another way to help yourself, is to go in isolation for a period of time. So if you find that this love of authority, this love of position, this love of status is affecting you, and you can't get away from it, you can't shake it, go in isolation for a while, or stay away from people for a little while. And this is going to help you to realize that I can act, I can do things, I can say things where I'm not so concerned all the time where what are people going to think? What are people going to think the way I'm standing this way, or the way that I'm talking this way, or the way that I'm walking this way? And then you start feeling a little bit more comfort. You start seeing, you know what, I'm doing things for the sake of Allah, or for the sake of doing them, but not just for the sake of people. This is something that can help you, inshallah. There's a second thing. So isolation is one of them. A second, and that's for a period of time though, by the way. It's not a permanent isolation. The second thing is to simply be content. Be content with what status Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. It's the same thing like wealth. Allah has given you a certain amount of wealth. If you're content with that amount of wealth that you have, and you look down below at other people who have less than you, you start appreciating everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. When you start looking up at other people and say, I wish I had that car and I wish I had that house, you're going to do the same thing with fame. I wish I had that many followers on Facebook. And I wish that many people would come and attend my lectures. Or I wish that many people would invite me to those summer parties that everyone is getting invited to. Rather look down and thank Allah. Say, oh Allah, thank you for all the status and reputation you've given me in front of those people, especially those people who I really care about. The status that they have with me, that's more than enough for me. It's more than enough for me to fulfill my needs in life. So that should be a sufficient amount. So when you're content with what you have, you're not going to be interested in getting all of these things. Okay? Any reflections or comments on this? Yeah. MashaAllah, a very, very good point. So you're saying this story about, it was a child riding on the donkey, and the father was, walking. So people say, oh look, it's so unfair, man. The child, makes the father walk. So they switched it, and the people started saying, oh man, look at the father. He doesn't care about his child. He makes the child walk. They both sat on the donkey, and then they said, look, people, the donkey is being overburdened. It's so, these people are so bad. So what are you going to get out of people's praise? There's always going to be someone who, doesn't like what you're saying. So the thing is, if you do things for the sake of Allah, you don't have to worry about any of these things. All right? You can focus on doing what you're doing as long as you know that is right. See, okay, so what you're saying is, if someone criticizes you and you're in a position of authority, can it be a reflection of what Allah is criticizing you or thinking about you? But the thing is, it depends on who's criticizing you. That's the thing. So if it is someone who really knows what they're talking about, and they have a very close connection to Allah, and they know, what Allah wants and doesn't want, then it's someone whose word you can take. But if it's just some random person, on what basis does his statement reflect what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala thinks about you? Right? So you have to weigh it that way. You have to think, is this really something that, just if you focus on what does Allah really want, then you're not going to care what He thinks about you. You're going to just look at His advice and see whether or not it's in line or not. Inshallah. Okay. All right. Let's move forward then. Let's move forward. The next topic is lack of self-control. What's known as wantonness. Okay. So wantonness is one of the terms that most people really don't use. Who's heard of wantonness before the class? Okay. So that's why we're going to use lack of self-control. Lack of self-control, the definition of wantonness or having a lack of self-control is when you have excessive desires, meaning you have strong desires of things, and you're not able to control those desires. Right? So you want a lot of things, you crave a lot of things, and you're not able to keep yourself in control of those cravings. You're not able to stop them. You're not able to. You have to act upon them. You can't control yourself. So this is the definition. Now, if you look at it, Sheikh Hamza, he mentions in his book that affluent societies are more vulnerable to wantonness than you'll find in other societies. Which is interesting because usually you would think the opposite. You would think that people who don't have something would be craving it more. But in reality, it's people who have wealth, who have luxury, who have a lot of things around them that actually crave it more. Because the way that it works works the opposite when it comes to, like for example, there's a principle in economics. It's called diminishing marginal utility. Okay? Anyone studied this in high school, right? Studied this in high school, right? So diminishing marginal utility, my teacher summarized it in this way. So it's basically when you're really, really hungry and you really want, you haven't eaten for a long time, and then somebody brings a pizza and you love pizza. That first bite of pizza is the best tasting bite of that entire pizza. And then that first slice tastes a little bit less, but it's still really, really good. Once you get to the second slice, the amount of satisfaction you're getting is going down a little bit. The third and the fourth slice are okay. By the fifth, sixth slice, you're like, pizza is good, but it was not as good as the first slice. So what ends up happening is when you start filling your desires, when it comes to food, it starts going down. So the demand starts going down, right? Once the supply goes up. That's economics, right? Meaning that, the more you fulfill yourself, the more you stop craving it because you're being fulfilled already. But when it comes to desires, it's the opposite. It's not the same way. A lot of people think it's going to be the same way. So people make comments. People make very strange comments in the Muslim community. They say like, you know what? Okay, you want to marry this type of girl, or you want to marry this type of guy, or whatever. Don't marry that person. Go and go to a nightclub. Go out, whatever. Just get it out of your system. All right? Anyone heard this? Muslims actually say this. You'd be surprised. Go and they say it to the guys more. Go and just if you need to do something, go just get it out of your system, and then we're gonna get you married to like nice cultural girl or whatever it may be. It's very common in our society. You'd be surprised at how much it's actually said. But their understanding is wrong. So you go and do it, get it out of your system. Go and smoke out a little bit, get it out of your system. But it's like drugs. Drugs are the perfect analogy for desires. When you start smoking, when you go and you inject heroin in your body one time, does it fulfill you to the sense that when you inject it the second time, you don't need as much? It doesn't feel as good? It may not feel as good, but your body craves it even more. Because you become so used to it. You become addicted to it. So now you need more and more to get the same kind of high. And you're craving that high though. You want it even more, and your body wants it even more. That's the way desires are. And that's why affluent societies are more prone to the disease of wantonness than are other societies. So what is the solution? The solution is to simply be content with what you have. But what happens in affluent societies like in our society today? People are actually content with being in debt and taking loans to buy things which they can't actually afford. So they can't even afford this type of lifestyle, but instead they're going to go and lease something, or they're going to go and take a loan out in order to buy something which originally they would not have been able to afford, with the assumption that they're going to maintain this level, this lifestyle. So technically it's always been that people will go and live a lifestyle in which they can actually afford. But today, now people are living a lifestyle one level above what they can actually afford, and they're very content and happy with being in debt, with the assumption or with the hope that they're going to be able to maintain that somehow. And if they can't maintain it, they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. So this is a problem. So people want to have, even though they're not wealthy, they want to have the appearance of being wealthy. Right? Even though you can't afford such and such type of luxury car, you still want to drive that luxury car. So you go ahead and find a way to drive it anyways, even though technically you don't own it. Right? So this is a problem. And I'm not saying leases are forbidden. I'm just saying that this is a problem within society. This is a problem that we find within society, and it's happening within our own society. And if you look at one of the causes behind this, is that we're being marketed with propaganda. We're being marketed with advertising and all of these images that's telling us that we should become wanton in our nature. We should want all of these things. We should just crave everything. So these things are being thrown at us, and people are going and accepting these things. So what is the cure? The cure is the four things. Number one, hunger. Okay, the author of the book, the poem, Imam Maulud, he mentions that one of the cures is to experience hunger. Now, how do you experience hunger? Either you can reduce the amount of food that you're eating, which we've talked about, and the second is you can start fasting. Now, what will reducing the amount of hunger do for you? It's going to teach you how to control your desires, because you're controlling your desire of hunger, which is a very strong desire. Then you'll be able to control other aspects or other desires that are coming your way. That's why the month of Ramadan is coming. That's one of the reasons why we fast. When you learn and you build up this ability to stay away from hunger, to stay away from water in the summer, and you can't stay away from buying that phone that you can't afford, or buying that computer which you can't afford. If you could stay away from water, you should be able to stay away from, enjoying the, special effect graphics that came out with Windows 8 or Mac OS X Lion or Mountain Lion or whatever it may be, right? You should be able to resist that as well, the way that you resisted water. So that's one. The second is to remember death, and which we're going to be talking about. To remember that once you die, all these things are going to be taken away from you. So why are you running after all of these things when they're all going to eventually be taken away from you anyways? So there's no point in that. The third is, remember your purpose in life. That when you become wanton and you start craving all these things, you start craving all these desires, you forget that there's actually a job that you have to do in life. Imagine you were to walk in your company and you see that there's a coffee machines. Start drinking coffee. And then you see, they had a free buffet that day. They brought some donuts to work. And you start eating all those donuts. And then you start looking around and you start looking at all the computers on everyone's desk and how fancy the chairs are. And you just go around like walking around and just looking at everything. You get fired because you have a job to do, right? You're there for a reason. You didn't just come here to eat. You didn't just come here to play around or swing around in your chair. Imagine you just jump in your chair and you're swinging around and enjoying yourself. And then the boss is like, what work did you do today? Well, I was really enjoying this chair. It's really nice. You have a job to do in life. You have a purpose in why Allah created you and put you in here. Allah says, we did not create you with no purpose. So He created you with a purpose. So if you're focusing on all these things, where are you going to have time to fulfill your purpose? You're going to get lost. And lastly, number 4, reflect on the fact that you can never achieve all that your heart desires in this world. You'll never be able to achieve it, no matter what. So you want to have that car that can go faster than any other car, right? And you want to have the absolute amount of luxury. You want to have the absolute amount of this or whatever. There's always going to be something wrong with that, if you look at it from that perspective. There can always be something better, right? Why can't my car fly? Right? I'm stuck in a traffic jam. Why can't it do like a turbo boost and jump over the other car or something like that, right? Old reference. So these kind of things, you want what? You want always something that is perfect. You can never get perfection in this life. So if you realize that, then what should you do? What's the smart person, what would they do? Where would you get perfection? In Jannah, in paradise. Right? So you strive for that, at least put some more effort into that as well, because that's the only place you're going to get it. You're never going to get it here. You're never going to be fully fulfilled here. Right? And if you know that you're not going to be fully fulfilled, then why are you running after that, trying to get as much as possible? So this is another thing that people can do, and realize that in the next life, they can get that fulfillment. They will not be able to get full fulfillment. And that applies to everything. That applies to everything. That applies to wealth. That applies to money. And that even applies to spiritual fulfillment. Shaykh Faqih and I, we have discussions on this, is that there's a really common notion today that people want to feel fulfilled spiritually. And they're craving it. And they're desiring that, I want to feel fulfillment in my own heart. And he said a very interesting thing. It's a really amazing quote, if you think about it. He said, we're here to fulfill, not to be fulfilled. So if we realize our actual purpose, we're actually here for a reason. We're not only here to be fulfilled ourselves, we're here to fulfill a purpose. We're here to do something, to accomplish something. When we're only focusing on ourselves, then we forget again our real status and our real purpose in life. So this also applies to the same thing. People are going from one place to another trying to get a spiritual high. They're going to one conference and they got it, they feel good, and they say, no, I still need more. So they go to another place to get another spiritual high. And they say, I need to, I need an iman boost, or I needed this, or I needed that. Realize that you're never going to be completely 100% fulfilled, because that's not the purpose in the first place. And actually wantonness can actually reflect even when it comes to craving spiritual fulfillment as well. So I just want to put that out there. Hopefully it's understandable. Any questions? See, the thing is, when you say fulfill spiritually, there's this new age understanding of spiritual fulfillment, which is kind of what I'm talking about. When you're more interested in feeling good about yourself than being a servant of Allah. That's what's becoming a problem. So even though when you serve Allah, there is a sense of fulfillment. But the thing is, if you don't get that fulfillment, would you serve Allah? That's the question. And that's part of the problem that we're at least experiencing as a community. A lot of people come and say, I don't want to do this anymore because it's not fulfilling me, because I'm not feeling it, because I'm not getting it. But that's not the reason why you should have been doing the thing in the first place. That's a side benefit. It's like when you eat, right? You eat because you need to eat. That's the way your body functions. Now, if the food tastes good, that's an added benefit. If the food doesn't taste good, you still need to eat. If you don't like the taste of the water, you still need to drink because it's something that's needed for you. So that's something that we need to be careful about that as well. Any other questions? Okay, blameworthy modesty. Okay, modesty is a bad translation of the word haya, but it means modesty or bashfulness is also not the best translation, but it can work. So let's take. Most of us are familiar with the concept of modesty or bashfulness or shyness. This is a characteristic and a trait that is actually recommended in Islam. It's a good trait. It's something which is looked up upon, rather than looked down upon. In this society in which we live, it's looked down upon generally. And the reasons why it's looked down upon, we'll look at it. We'll look into the reasons why it's looked down upon and why it doesn't apply to Islam. So what is blameworthy modesty? Blameworthy modesty is when you get to a point where you're bashful or you're shy or you're modest, meaning you're reserved, to a point where you've gone too far, where it's preventing you from doing something else. So what are the two things that it can prevent you from doing? It can prevent you, number one, from denouncing something which deserves to be condemned. So something that is wrong, something that is bad, you see something bad happening, and you decide that I'm not going to go and say something about it because I have that shy characteristic in me. Or, I don't want to bother those people. Or, I don't want to seem like I'm forthcoming, or I don't want to seem like I'm, aggressive. So it's opposite characteristic of being aggressive is modesty, but it becomes blameworthy when you're in a position where you should be stopping something. Like, for example, there's tyranny, there's injustice, there's oppression. What is happening? Something is going on, and you're in a position where you have a responsibility to tell someone that you shouldn't be doing this. For example, somebody comes and litters, let's say in the masjid. And you see them litter, and they threw something on the floor, they threw some trash right on the floor. And you're thinking, should I go up to them or should I not? And you have a modest character, and you think, should I not? Your responsibility is to go to that person and tell them that, this is wrong what you've done. You should throw this in the trash can when you get an opportunity. But if that modesty is preventing you from doing something like that, it gets to the characteristic of being blameworthy. It's not looked up upon. It's not that when somebody is shy, they say, well, no, I was shy to go and tell them, oh, mashallah, you were shy. That's not the time to be shy. Okay, that's one thing. The second is that when it prevents you from doing something good. Okay, so let's take a few examples. The examples which we can look at are the examples from the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, where, women generally were considered to have a higher level of modesty or shyness when it comes to asking questions in particular. Now, there's modesty for men as well. It's for men and women. It's not only for women. But over there are women who are afraid to, or who were shy in asking certain questions, right? So they didn't want to go and ask certain questions about, if you look at today even, people don't like to talk about certain topics. People are shy about talking about certain topics related to, marital relationships and related to, things that they're watching on the internet and all of that. People are shy to even bring it up. But the thing is, when it needs to be brought up or when it needs to be asked, and they don't bring it up out of modesty or out of shyness, this is a blameworthy form of modesty. So let's take an example. There was a woman during the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, where he was explaining that you need to take a bath after, you emit, semen, or you emit, some type of sexual fluid. So one woman was coming and asking him, saying, does that apply for the female as well? He says, yes, that applies for the female as well. And she started asking him in such a way that she wanted to know that does it really apply for the female? And anyways, it's a long story that happened. But the thing was, the modesty did not prevent her from asking directly whether or not this breaks her, whether or not she needs to make ghusl or take a bath before she prays. For many, many people, they would not have asked the question. And therefore, they would not have known the answer. And this should not be something which prevents people from doing something, from doing something which they need to do. Another example is, the women of Medina used to send their, cotton pieces, or their cloth, which was stained with blood, menstrual blood, and they would send it to Aisha. May Allah be pleased with her. They would send it to Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, because they were shy of going and asking the Prophet directly. Okay, that's fine. But they knew that Aisha knew the answer as well. So they would go and Aisha would get a box. She would literally get a box of people's, cloth stained with like some menstrual blood, with different colors all over the place. And they're basically asking her, when should we start praying again? Right? When does the menstrual cycle? We don't just want to explain to you. We want to show you. Look, there's a little bit of color here, or there's a little bit of this here. When can we start praying again? So they were not shy. They were not shy to go and actually send a piece, to her. Can you imagine today, if someone were to do something like that? I'm not saying you should do it. You don't have to do it. You describe it. But what they did was they would send it because they were so concerned about small things like this, and they wanted to know. They wanted to know, does this apply? Does this apply? And she would give them an answer. So this is a good example of modesty by not directly asking the Prophet ﷺ, but not being blameworthy modesty by going and directly asking Aisha. So the balance was perfect. And if you look at why modesty has been removed from our society today, especially with Western feminist movements and all of that, the underlying reason, one of the underlying reasons is because it was felt that a woman, and this is for women, although modesty should apply for men as well. They were felt that a woman or certain people, when they're modest, when they're bashful, when they're a little bit reserved in their behavior, they're not going to be able to achieve the same things that they can achieve when they're more aggressive, when they're more straightforward. They're not going to be able to achieve the same things. So the real problem was they were fighting against blameworthy modesty. I mean, whatever their real intentions were, whatever it was. Initially, they were looking at, you're not able to achieve things that you need to achieve. Now, their needs compared to Islamic needs are obviously different, but the understanding was the same, is that we need to get this concept of modesty away from our society because it's preventing people from doing things which they need to be doing. But that falls in the category of blameworthy modesty as well. So Islam has the balance, really. Balance is you have the level in which you should, which is respectable, something that's good. You're not too forthcoming, you're not too straightforward. At the same time, it's not preventing you from doing other things. So let's take an example of virtuous modesty from the Prophet ﷺ, from the Prophet, peace be upon him. Verse in the Quran, which refers to an incident where some guests came to the house of the Prophet. And they were staying for a meal, and this was after one of his marriages. And they're staying for a meal and everything, and the time is getting late, and the people aren't leaving because they love the Prophet, they want to stay with him, and the time is going, he has other things to do. He needs to, sleep, he needs to go meet other people, there's things he needs to do, but he would not tell them to leave because out of his modesty. Right? Out of his modesty, he didn't want to tell them, it's time for you now to leave. This is a virtuous type of modesty, but Allah came and told them, says, this hurt the Prophet, but he shied away from telling you. Right? So Allah sent the revelation saying that these type of things, stop bothering the Prophet so much, because he doesn't want to tell you no. He doesn't want to tell you please leave. He doesn't want to say, you just get out of my office. I don't have time for you. But out of his modesty, at the same time, you shouldn't overburden him as well. You shouldn't go at the wrong time. You shouldn't, bother him when he's in the middle of something. These type of things. So there's a fine balance between these two. But we wanted to focus mainly on blameworthy modesty, right? Because this is something which can cause people to stop themselves from doing things. Stop themselves from doing things which they should be doing. And this is a very big problem in our society as well. See, that what happens is, when people start becoming righteous, when they start inclining more towards Islam, when they start practicing more, then they start realizing, you know what, I was way too forthcoming, I was way too aggressive, I was way too this. They try and develop modesty in their life. Oftentimes they go too much to the other side. Now they're afraid to say anything. They're afraid to correct anybody else. There really has to be a proper balance when it comes to modesty. In our society, I would say that generally we're lacking in modesty. We're lacking in haya, so we need to go this way. But because this is CIS, generally people who are enrolled in here are serious about being good Muslims. And when they're serious about that, they generally tend to fluctuate a little bit to the other side. Which is why for us in particular, I feel we need to be careful. You need to weigh yourself. You need to know yourself, and you need to know what type of person you are. So, inshallah, that helps. Any questions on that? Yeah, you can pick it up for them, but the thing is, where are you correcting that person? Right? You have a responsibility to correct that person so they don't do it again. Otherwise, they're just going to do it again. Someone just comes and throws the trash, and you say, okay, I'm going to pick it up. They're going to throw it again. And when you're not there, who's going to pick it up? Okay, let's move on. The next topic, remembering death. This is not exactly a disease of the heart, but rather it's something that's virtuous. But the actual disease of the heart is vain hope. So these two things are coupled with each other. There's remembering death and there's vain hope. Having vain hope of long life is the actual disease of the heart. So what is vain hope? What does vain hope actually mean? It means that when somebody assumes with a level of certainty that they're going to live for a very long time, or that they're hoping that they're going to get something, but there's no guarantee of that. That's vain hope. And vain hope results in, it's one of the main motives that people have in wanting to cling to this world, wanting to stay in this world and loving this world. And that results in them hating death, hating to actually die, actually never wanting to ever have to face death. And this is one of the problems why people pursue their desires. Because when you hate death and you don't want to ever go in the next life, you start focusing only on this life. Once you focus on this life, then you start following and pursuing all the desires that you have, and nothing's there to stop you. Whereas remembering death is something, look, death is something which is inevitable. Everyone believes in it, for the most part. I mean, generally across the board, everyone believes in it. Some people believe that it can someday be averted. Right? So now there's new scientific theory that's coming out, where people are saying that sometime in the future we're trying to make ourselves live in like an avatar type of body. So you somehow transfer your mind into this, this machine type of body, like a little brain in it and stuff like that, and it's going to be, controlling your thoughts. So you can survive for a longer period of time when you're living as like a avatar or something like that. Now that, whatever that may mean or indicate, everyone generally believes that they're going to die. All right? Even the people who are searching for immortality, they believe in death, regardless of their religion, regardless of whatever their philosophical inclinations. But remembering death does something very important. Remembering that you're going to die, because everyone knows they're going to die. But remembering that they're going to die and making it active in their mind and active in their heart is going to do what for them? It's going to remind them that they need to focus on their purpose in life. It's going to remind them that there's certain things they need to do, they want to do, they're inclined to do, they know they have to do before they die. And they want to make sure that they're in a certain state in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before their life is taken away. So this is what remembering death is actually going to be able to do. But at the same time, we need to remember something. Remembering death does not mean that it's going to impede your worldly progress. Right? This is a lot of things. People think that, well, if you remember death, that's a fatalistic mentality. So this is going to impede your ability to be able to do things in life or be able to, function in life or whatever it may be. No. The difference is that when you remember death, you remember to focus on doing things for the sake of Allah rather than focusing on doing things for the sake of your own pleasure or your own desires. That's what it does for you. So it doesn't mean that if you start remembering death, if you really knew that you were going to die, would you stop eating? No, you wouldn't stop eating. Some people will say, well, I would stop eating. If I knew I was going to die in an hour, then I wouldn't eat. Right? If I knew for sure I wouldn't be eating, I would be praying, or I would be doing something else. But for a Muslim, everything you do can potentially be there, can potentially be done for the sake of Allah, if the intention is there. So you eat in order to strengthen your body, in order to maintain the trust that Allah has given you, and then you have enough energy to pray. And then you have enough energy to talk to somebody else. And you have enough energy to go and, smile at somebody, or go and talk to them about Islam, or go and, play with your children, who have a which is an act of worship if it's being done for the sake of Allah, or a responsibility to take care of your family, or a responsibility to work, because you need to earn that money in order to buy the stuff that you need, to survive. All of these things can be channeled in a certain way. So what remembering death actually does, it doesn't make you a fatalistic person. It makes you aware about why you're doing the things that you're doing already. And you ask yourself, what is my real intention? This is what remembering death is supposed to be doing for you. So, how does it work? The thing is, the first thing is you should think about the future. Stop every time you can, every time you set a schedule or whatever, think about the future and remember what's going to happen to you. So what's going to happen to you when you die? Most likely, what's going to end up happening when you die, your home now is going to be the grave. You're going to be placed inside the ground. Your only companions, the only people who are regularly visiting you are going to be insects and worms, because they're living inside the earth. This is what you're going to be. You're going to be inside. The angels are going to come and they're going to visit you, and they're going to ask you certain questions about what you did in this life. So think about that. Then you have an appointment. Your appointment is that you're going to be standing in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're going to be standing in front of Him, and you're going to be judged. And you're going to watch every single one of your deeds being displayed in front of you. Every single thing that you thought, every single thing that you did, every single word that you spoke is going to be coming in front of you. And this is why when you think about the future, and the more you reflect upon what's really going to happen, if you have that image in your mind, and then you're thinking, someone is marketing something, here, buy this, go and fulfill yourself. Someone comes in front of you and says, here, perform this act with me, or go and click on me and go do something which is forbidden in Islam. Then you start thinking, what if I'm focusing on this thought, I'm not gonna consider this. But you would consider this when you don't focus on that. So when you do that, you realize why the Prophet ﷺ said, a wise person is the one who controls his desires and works for what comes after death. So the person he's working for what comes after death, because he's keeping death in mind. So the first way to prepare for death, or to prepare for death, is to remember it constantly. Remember it on a regular basis. How can you achieve this? You can achieve this either by remembering death itself, or you can achieve it by reminding yourself of what helps you to prepare for death. Right? There's two options you have, and we're going to look at them in more detail. You can prepare for death either by reflecting upon it itself, or by reflecting upon what reminds you of death. Right? So illnesses, diseases, catastrophes, things which remind you about death. Okay, this is what happens. People, they see a movie, or they see a news report that a certain amount of people died, or they're watching some film or something like that, and someone all of a sudden dies in a certain situation, and they start thinking, man, if I was in that case. Someone watches a horror film or whatever it is, say, wow, what if the guy with the chainsaw was running after me and I was inside? For a moment, they start reflecting upon death. But to what extent do they move with it? That's another thing. So the first way to prepare is to remember it constantly. But most people do not reflect on death, and they don't want to. They want to avoid it completely, and Allah says in the Quran, the reckoning draws near, meaning the day of judgment draws near for people, but they turn away in heedlessness. They don't want to remember it. It bothers them. It's something that this is not a topic we should be discussing. This is not a topic we should even talk about. This is something that it's for other people to think about, or when it comes, we don't want to reflect upon it. This is the opposite of a believer. The believer should be remembering it often. The one who is consumed, the person who's consumed by worldly pleasures, they're always thinking about how can I fulfill myself, right? They are not interested in remembering death. And in fact, even when they remember death, they have this aversion, they have this hatred towards it. And in reality, it puts them further and further away from Allah. Every time they remember death, it brings them further away from Allah. Why? Because they have a hatred towards it. So when you hate it and you have an aversion against it, then you're gonna be in a problematic state. So people fall into the following categories. Let's look at the categories. Category number 1 is a heedless person. A person doesn't care about anything. A person who's wanton, who's following their desires, they don't care about anything. This type of person, the reason why we're describing this, by the way, is you judge yourself. Ask yourself, where do you think you really are? So I'm going to give you the description here of the person, what they're like, and you ask yourself, which category do I feel like I fall into? So number 1 is a heedless person. This person does not remember death at all. Very, very rarely ever remembers death. Whenever they think about death, it's always with regret. It's always with sorrow. They're always, sad to think about death because of all the worldly pleasures that they would have to leave behind. So their focus is, if I were to die, I would lose my car, I would lose my computer, I would lose my friends. I would lose my friends, I would lose my this, I would lose my that, I would lose everything. So for them, they're focusing on what they would have to leave behind, and that's why they have an aversion to death. So this person, when they remember death, in reality, they get further and further away from Allah, because whenever they think about death, they're actually thinking about, they're increasing their attachment to this life. They start going back and focusing on their attachments to this life, so it actually takes them further and further away from Allah. The second person is a person who has begun to become aware of the reality of life, meaning someone who's getting on the path, towards Allah. This person tries to remember death on a regular basis in order for them to become more mindful of Allah, to bring taqwa in their heart, and they remember death to help themselves repent before death overtakes them. So they're thinking about it, they're reminding themselves sometimes from a time. But this person may actually hate to die. So this person may have a hatred of dying, but the reason why they hate to die is different than the first person. The first person hates to die, why? Because of what they're going to leave behind. This person doesn't want to die because they feel that they're not ready yet. They feel that they're not ready in the sight of Allah yet. They haven't asked Allah for forgiveness enough yet. They haven't done enough in their life yet to, that they think that Allah is going to be pleased with them yet. So this person hates to die, but they hate to die for a different reason. So the reasoning is very different. And this form of disliking death is something which is excused. It's not blameworthy. It's not wrong to hate death for this reason, because the reason for hating it is different. So this is something that can be overlooked. And the example is, it's like a person who has an appointment with someone who they really, really love. They really love that person and they have an appointment with them. But they don't want to have the appointment right now because they're not ready for them. Imagine you're inviting somebody to your house and you really, really like that person. You want to give them the best treatment. You want to prepare nice food. You want to, entertain them in a very nice way. You show them hospitality. But if they were to show up right now, the next minute, you're not ready for them. So you don't hate the appointment itself. You just don't like the timing because you feel that you're not ready yet. So what is this person supposed to be doing? They're supposed to obviously start preparing. They're going to start preparing, but they don't have a problem with the appointment itself, right? So this person does not fall in the category of being blamed. There's a hadith, a prophetic statement of the Prophet, peace be upon him, where he said, whoever loves to meet Allah, Allah loves to meet that person. Whoever loves to meet Allah, Allah loves to meet that person. This is authentic, Bukhari and Muslim. Imam Ghazali says, this category of these people don't fall into this category. Because it's not that they don't want to meet Allah. They just don't want to meet Allah right now in this state. So the reason for not wanting to die is very different from the first person. So this is category number 2. Category number 3 is the firm believer. The firm believer. This person remembers death constantly. In everything that they're doing, they're always reflecting upon death. It's like a person who has been waiting for permission to enter into a place that they've been trying to get into. Like imagine you're knocking on a door, you're waiting. You're just waiting till it comes. You're prepared for it, you feel you're ready for it, and you're just waiting. I need to, let it come. Now, this person in reality loves death. So the firm believer is a person who actually starts loving death. They actually want to die. And you find people like this. They actually want to die, meaning that, say, you know what, just take it now. I'm tired of this life. I've had enough. I'm just waiting to go into the next one. Now, this person should not actually be loving death. You should not actually want to die. But this person is also excused for wanting to die, because in reality, the reason why they want to is they want to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they're excused as well. So the first person, the previous person is excused because they feel they're not ready, but they like the appointment. This person is excused because their desire is actually to want to meet Allah. But the best believer, the real highest status of a believer, is the person who has no desire for life and they have no desire for death. They don't care either. So for them, whatever Allah decides is what they want, what they're happy with. So whatever Allah decides, you want to take me at this point in time, I'm happy with your decision. Whatever your decision is, I know that there's a wisdom behind it. I know there's a reason why you're doing it, and this is the highest status. So neither hating death nor wanting death is actually the highest status. The best status is doing whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides. But in reality, if we look at all these people, in reality, most people are going to be attracted by the glitter and the glamour of this world. So what is the best thing for them? The best thing for them is to remember death on a regular basis. Is to remember it on a regular basis and to prepare themselves, because it's going to draw them in the opposite direction. So it's something which is helpful, something which is beneficial for them, and it will keep them away from excessive heedlessness, which many people are likely to fall into. Okay? What are some of the benefits of remembering death? Let's take a look at some statements. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, constantly remember the destroyer of pleasures. Hazim al-ladhat. The destroyer of pleasures. So keep in mind always the one thing that's going to remove all the pleasures that you have in this life, worldly pleasures. Which is what? Which is death. So once you die, all those pleasures are taken away from you. Now what is this statement implying? It's implying that the Prophet is saying, remember it and keep it in mind, because what is it going to do for you? When you're interested in going and focusing on some desire or some pleasure or running after that, if you remember this is going to destroy this thing, and it's going to come and you don't know when it's going to come, then you're not going to be focusing on this. This is not that important anymore for you. Right? If you invest your money in a place, you buy some property, right? All your life savings, you buy property in a certain place. Now all of a sudden you're thinking, that property is going to make money, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. Now there's a giant storm. They say that this region is very unstable. Any time now it can be hit by an earthquake and a storm, and we found out this is the worst land on the face of the earth. It can be destroyed at any time. What would you do? You'd be thinking, that investment, horrible investment. No one's going to buy it, I can't sell it. You're not going to start focusing and thinking how great is that house and how many, staircases does it have and how many stories is it? Because you say, if that's going to come and it's going to be wiped out anyway, let's go and focus on something more important, something more lasting, something that's going to actually be able to do some more benefit. So this is what the Prophet ﷺ is saying, and it'll lead a person to check themselves so that they can go back to a healthy balance between doing things for this world and doing things for the next life. The Prophet ﷺ said, the world is a prison for the believer and a paradise for the unbeliever. Okay? Now how is it a prison for the believer? Who can explain that to me? Okay, that's an interesting analogy. So your prison in the sense that your actions are restrained, you can't do so many things because you have rules to follow, you're saying? And you're being watched over by guards. Okay, that's interesting. That applies, but I don't think that's exactly what the example was. Anyone else? Okay, you're a slave of your desires. So the prison for the believer, but not for the unbeliever. So he's not a prisoner to his desires. So why is it not a prison for the unbeliever? Exactly. So realizing that the believer is thinking about there's another life, so this world is like the prison for him, waiting for him to get out and get into the real world, right? Whereas the unbeliever who doesn't believe in that is someone who's, for them, this is the only life. So it's a paradise for them, right? Good, alhamdulillah. Was anyone going to add something else to that? Right. No, that's true. That's a good point. New research just came out, actually, that this is kind of a tangent, but research just came out that they did a experiment at one of the universities. I forgot which state it was, and they actually put sensors. They were monitoring brain activity, and when they saw that, when people were looking at women who were wearing swimsuits, guys were looking at women who were wearing swimsuits, they actually shut down one part of their brain, which actually causes you to think. Basically, it causes you the rational part of your brain was completely shut down in that entire area, and basically the other part of the brain, which stimulates something else, was being fired on a high level. So this research was showing that in reality, they were going through and talking about who invented the bikini. Right? So it was a history of the bikini and how this French guy came up with the idea that, who invented it originally. And he said it should show this much, it should show this much, and the amount of material that's used should actually fit through like a ring. It should be able to go through a ring. That was a design. So it's an analysis of what the bikini has actually done to society. It was a scientific analysis. So people who are claiming that hijab is a prison or something like that, they should look into that research. Oh, she should be in prison for wearing a hijab. Oh, wow. Oh. I got it. Okay, alhamdulillah. We're already in prison from that perspective. Okay, alhamdulillah. But there are better ways to explain also. So the thing is, because you don't want to tell someone that, well, you know what, you should be in prison. This is more for the believer, right? But when you explain to somebody else, you explain to them the benefits as well. Inshallah, so that's good. All right, so this world is a prison for the believer and a paradise for the unbeliever. A wise man once said, beware of death while you are still in this life. Once you move to the other dwelling place, you might search for death but not find it. So this is a very relevant quote. Once you move to the next life, you may want to die if you're not in the right place, but you're not going to be able to. So now prepare for death in this life, because you're not going to be able to be sent back. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, one of the Khalifas in the past in Islam, he used to invite scholars every night to study the different states of death, to study the hereafter, and to study the resurrection. So he used to invite them, and this used to be a gathering. And they would all start crying as if a dead person was in front of them. Like as if they were at a funeral and they knew the person and they were crying. It is said that they would start crying because they would be studying the states of death and thinking and reflecting upon death. So it's something that's been practiced. It's not something that is just people are coming up with. Ka'b, one of the companions, he said, the one who knows death is not overly concerned with worldly calamities and concerns. Once you know and you understand death and you understand what's going to happen, worldly calamities doesn't mean anything to you anymore. It's not such a big deal. Worldly concerns, why are you stressed out all the time? Because you can't make some payment, or you can't do this, or someone made fun of you, or somebody did this. What are you getting stressed out for? What are you getting upset for? What are you getting all worried about? You can't buy this, or you can't do this, or my house, it burned down or something. If you really understand death, none of these things would be affecting you. But the reason why they affect us is because we don't understand, or we don't reflect. We don't really reflect upon it. Continuing, Safiya, one of the companions, she relates that a woman came to Aisha. A woman came to the wife of the Prophet, Aisha, and she complained of having a hard heart. Now this is just before we even, don't look at the rest of the story. Before we even continue, this takes courage, right? To walk up to somebody and say that I have a hard heart. It means this person was looking for guidance. It means this person realized they knew themselves. You say, you know what? I have a hard heart. I'm very hard-hearted. I'm a person I need to soften it up. I'm very tough. I'm too much. I've gone to too much of this extent. So Aisha told her, remember death often and your heart will become soft. This was her advice to her. And she said, she did it and it worked, and she came back and she says, I can feel the difference. I see the difference in my life, because she was really searching for a way to soften her heart up. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, again, he asked a scholar, this is interesting. He asked a scholar, He said, I want you to teach me something. This is a real insightful scholar. Let's think about this. This is the Khalifa of the Muslims. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is the Khalifa, the leader of the Muslims from 99 to 101 Hijri. He controls a region which is stretching from, North Africa all the way down to India, down into Africa, up to Syria and above. We're talking the largest empires he's controlling right now. So he walks up to one of the scholars and he says, I want you to teach me something. A scholar could teach anything, right? I'll teach you some random thing. Most scholars, I wouldn't say at his time, but many scholars that you'll find, let's say many. There's quite a few scholars you can find that will go and flatter the Khalifa, all right, to get something. They'll say, you know what, let me teach you something. A just leader is such and such. This guy wanted to put him in check. He wanted to make sure that this Khalifa does not get out of line. So he says, teach me something. He says, you're not the first leader to die. Stating a fact, you're not the first leader to die. Meaning all these leaders in the past, they've died before. You think you're not going to die? He's reminding him of death. Then he said, okay, anything else you want to teach me? He said, yeah. None of your ancestors from Adam up until now ever lived forever. So remember that too. So your time is close. And Umar began to cry. Umar, because he was a very righteous man. So it means that the remembrance of death was something that was there. It's something that when people came and asked for advice, they weren't just getting the advice on certain little thing that they're, certain little aspect of life, but they were getting a reminder about what they should be doing. Rabi' ibn Khaytham, this may seem extreme to some people, but if it's done on a very once in a while basis, it could actually help. Rabi' ibn Khaytham dug a grave in his house, and he used to sleep inside that grave in order to remember death. And he said, if I had neglected to remember death, my soul would have become corrupt. Now, this is a very extreme action, but at the same time, if you are in a Muslim retreat or something like that, for example, I know that there's a retreat that some of the brothers participate in, that they actually take you out at night to the graveyards. They dig a grave and they actually put you in there. And I've heard first-hand experience from some of my friends. They told me, and this is some of the people that I knew, they were really jokers. They're joking all the time and just playing around and not taking things serious. After that one incident, they said they wrapped me up and they actually put me in there. And he says, from that experience, he says, you know what, I can't even describe to you. The way he was describing to me that experience, he said, it's something I never thought of. I was so heedless. I never reflected upon this at all until it was actually there. They carried me and they put me in there, and I started thinking about it at that moment. And he says, this really had a big life-changing effect on me. So it's something that may sound really extreme, but if it's, done at some camp or under supervision or something like that, it could potentially have some benefit. Okay? So what is the proper etiquette in remembering death? How should it be done? How should you try and remember death? This is not something where you can make zikr, You can't say, death. It's not going to do any good for you. It's not going to help you at all. So how do you actually remember death? Here are some of the ways. One of the ways to remember death is to remember people who were close to you. It's one of the most effective ways. Think about your friends. Think about your family. Think about the details of how well you knew them, and think about how they died. Think about the state in which they died, right? Remember how they died in detail, and think about the state that they're in now. Right? Think about what their body is going to be looking like at this moment. Think about where their house is right now. Think about what's going on over there with them. If you think about these things, you'll start thinking more about life. Now, remember, think about the positions that they used to occupy. Think about the house they used to have. Think about the car they used to drive. Think about the respect and the position and the authority they used to have. Reflect upon that. And think about what happened to it now. Where did it go? Does it exist anymore? And if you reflect upon that and you think about yourself, what does your car mean for you? What does your job mean for you? What is the respect that people have for you? What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. What is going to happen to everything that you possess? What is going to happen to everything that you own? It's going to be in the same state. It's going to be in the same status. And you're going to be in the same place. Your house is not going to be your house anymore. Your apartment is not going to be your apartment anymore. You're going to be in the same state. If you reflect upon that, and you see how everything has been replaced by the state that they're in, then you'll take a lesson from them. A wise person will take a lesson from these people. Another way to do it, 2 more ways, is to visit hospitals. Visit people who are terminally ill. If you visit someone who's in a state, who's going through cancer right now, you visit someone who's dying of some type of disease, and they're on their deathbed and the doctors say there's nothing we can do, and they're being pumped with morphine. You don't go to visit the sick just because the hadith says you should go visit the sick. There's a reason behind it. There's an underlying wisdom behind it. It's to remind you of death. It's to remind you of your time. You know, people who are joking and telling jokes and telling stories and everything, the moment they jump into a hospital, when they see that, unless they're really, really heedless, you find that they're different in that state. When they walk in the room, they're different. They're not the same person that they were. When they walk out, if there's no effect, if that had no effect, they're going to go right back to it. If it had some effect, you'll see a little bit different change in their character. You make them think a little bit. And visiting the graveyards is the same thing. You visit the graveyards, you go, unfortunately, graveyards today in America are like, playgrounds or like parks with flowers and really fancy and all of that. But generally, graveyards used to be places where it's just graves. It's just dirt. That's all it was. So when you go there and you reflect and you sit there, this is a place where you start thinking about death. You start thinking, you know what? Because when people don't like to visit graveyards. Right? Most people who are heedless, they don't want to visit a graveyard. Why? Because it reminds them of death. But the believer should go and visit a graveyard from time to time to remind them of death. Because it's a good thing for the believer. So go and ask yourself, when's the last time you actually went to a graveyard? Go, and next time when you decide, you know what? Let's go and eat a meal with some of our friends. Well, you know what? After we eat the meal or before we eat the meal, let's go as a group, let's take a little field trip to the graveyard and sit and reflect. Think about that. Reflect upon that. Now, going back to the underlying cause of the disease, the problem. The underlying problem is vain hope. Having vain hope is the real root of the problem. The Prophet ﷺ said to Abdullah ibn Umar, the son of Umar, radiallahu anh, if you reach the morning, don't assume that you're going to make it to the evening. And if you make it to the evening, don't assume that you're going to make it to the morning. What is he saying? He's saying don't have high expectations that you're going to live for a very long time. And this is what deludes many people. Their delusion is that, you know what? I don't even reflect upon what's going to happen to me. I can't be one of those people who have passed away. I can't die in the state that I'm in. I'm too young, or I'm too healthy, or I'm too this, or I'm too that. The Prophet ﷺ is telling him, giving him advice. And this Ibn Umar, if you understand, this is a man who's young. Because he's the son of Umar. Umar was even younger than the Prophet ﷺ. Imagine how old Abdullah ibn Umar, the son of Umar, was when the Prophet was alive. And he's telling this young man, he's telling him, don't think that you're going to make it till the evening. And don't think you're going to make it till the morning. So reflect upon that. Number 2, the Prophet ﷺ said, the example of the son of Adam is like a person who's surrounded by 99 disasters, which will lead to death eventually. Imagine a tornado and a hurricane and flash flood and earthquake and all of these things. If all of them miss him, he's still going to be taken by old age and he's going to die. That's what the Prophet is saying. So imagine how many different ways can you die. You can die in an earthquake, you can die in a flood, you can die in a war, you could die someone shooting you, you could die from a disease, you can die from a car hitting you, you can die in a car accident. You can die so many different ways you can die. And he says all these disasters which can kill you, even if they don't get you, you're going to be taken by old age. So don't forget, it's going to hit you no matter what. The Prophet ﷺ said, or he was in front of his companions, and he took a stick and he drew a square. He drew a square in the sand. And he drew one line inside the square. You have to focus on this to understand it. He drew one line inside the square. And then he drew many other lines all over inside that square. So one small line and one lines all over the place. And then he drew one line outside of the square. Okay? And then he said, this one little line that I drew in the middle, this shows you the human being. This is the human being. All these lines around here, these are all the paths of death surrounding him everywhere. And this line outside of the square is the hope that he has that he's going to make it here. And he's not going to make it here. He's not going to make it this far. But this is the hope that he has. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying what? He's basically telling people that your hope shouldn't be out here. Your hope should be cut a little bit and stop having this vain hope that you're going to survive this long. Because you're not going to make it, and that's going to affect your behavior. He's telling us how it should affect our mentality. The Prophet ﷺ said, the son of Adam grows old holding on to two things. Even when you get really, really old, there's two things that you love when you're old, even when you love when you're young. Greed and hope. You still have that greed that you have, even though you're old, you can't do the same things you were able to do, and you still have that hope. You know, when people who are young, they have the hope, I'm going to live till a longer time. Even when people become old, they still hold on to that hope. I still got a few years to live. I still got a few good years, to go for me. This is something that the Prophet ﷺ was warning people about. Let's look at two sayings of the righteous people. Hassan, the grandson of the Prophet ﷺ, said, heedlessness and hope are actually two blessings for people. So he's trying to look at it from a different perspective. They're blessings. If it was not for them, no one would even be walking around in the street. No one would want to do anything if you didn't have a little bit of hope. So the difference is, vain hopes is something where you think, you're going to live longer than in reality you could have. But he says, in reality, you have to have some level of hope, otherwise you wouldn't want to do anything at all. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he said, where are all the handsome people? Where are all the beautiful looking people? Where are all the kings who've built all these towns and fortified them? Where are the people who built all these giant civilizations? All of them have been buried in the darkness of the grave, not knowing whether they're going to enter paradise or hell. He made a public statement reminding people that all these things that people have, the beauty and the wealth and the status and the fame, what's going to happen to all of it? Nothing. Oh, look at all the people who had it before you. What happened to them? They're dead. They're dead, and you're going to experience the same thing. So what are the causes? What are the causes and what are the remedies? There are two causes. The first cause of why people have vain hopes is because they love life. We talked about this. They love life. So once your heart becomes accustomed to following your desires, then that person tries to avoid death because he hates death, so he can keep his desires. False hopes of long life are usually accepted by people because of the type of lifestyle that they live, and it agrees with their lifestyle. So if your lifestyle is all about getting stuff, and then you think, should I remember death or should I have a long hope? And you say, let's go with the hope. Why do you go with the hope? Because it agrees with your lifestyle. So you're more inclined towards accommodating this rather than accommodating this, because it goes in with what you've been doing for a very long time. Now people who have vain hope, they're willing to do anything to achieve their desires. They're willing to do whatever it takes in order to get all of the things. The moment that death occurs to them, that the thought of death occurs to them, they try to ignore it. So you think about death and you start saying, no, let's think about something else. Let's tell a funny joke. Let's tell some joke to make people laugh. Or let's go watch a movie so we can stop thinking about it for a moment. So this is something which people fall into. And this is what Imam Ghazali says. This is really nice. When the thought of death occurs, the person tries to ignore it and raises his hopes of a long life, telling himself that there's plenty of time for you to change your lifestyle later on. You can always change later. You don't have to change right now. You don't have to, you're not praying 5 times a day. You can start doing it soon. You're not ready yet. You're not dressing correctly. You're not wearing your hijab. You're not dressing the way you should be dressing. You're wearing weird stuff or whatever it is. You have time to change it. You'll be ready soon. You're not ready now. You'll be ready later on. You have time to get ready. Don't worry. And then he says, when the person becomes an adult, he's going to say to himself, well, you know what? Wait till you get a little bit older, then you can change. You'll be more wise. You won't have so many things to do and all of that. Wait till you get older. Once the person reaches old age, then what is he going to say? He's going to say, you know what? Let's just finish off that one more project. I'm building that retirement home for myself. Once I build that home, then, we can start preparing. Or let me just finish that one journey. When I come back from that one trip, let us go on this one vacation. As soon as we come back from that one vacation, okay, then we'll start preparing. So always that one thing, always trying to go and add one more thing. But in reality, when death comes, the person's going to be full of regret. They're going to be full of regret, and they're going to be sad that they had this excessive hope, thinking that they're going to live for a longer period of time. And he says you should not have that state, because there's always going to be something more to do. There's always something to do. There's always some project. There's always, some place to go. There's always some meal to eat. There's always something to do. It's never going to continue. It's never going to end if you keep putting everything off and say, you know what, I'm going to change this about myself a little bit later. And I'm going to do this other thing a little bit later. I have time for that. There's always going to be something that's coming to you. So you have to be very careful. Now, to clarify, the way that you behave towards this world depends on what you're hoping to achieve out of it. So, this is from Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. If you love wealth, if you really love wealth in order to spend it in charity, and the only reason why you love to get money is so that you can give it out in charity, then your love for this world is not a bad thing. But how many people are there like that? How many people do you actually find that love something like that? So, if you love it so that you can attend to your basic needs, or you can do something for the sake of Allah, then that's allowed. Loving the world, that you love it to a point of one of two things. That you either love it, something which is prohibited, or you love something which will prevent you from seeking the next life, the hereafter. That's when it becomes a problem. And that's why it is a problem. Okay? So because people that run after the world, they deplete all of their time, they deplete all of their energy, and now they don't have any time to do anything left for the sake of Allah. So wanting a few things here and there, enjoying a good food, enjoying these things, this is allowed. It's allowed. But the moment you start craving and desiring things which are not allowed for you, or you start doing these things to a point where you don't have any time or any energy or you don't have effort left to go and do something for the sake of Allah, that's when you have a problem. That's when you are in a problem. Number two. The number two cause of why people have vain hopes is due to their ignorance. How is it ignorance? Well, a person can be deluded by the health and by the strength and by the youth that they have. So generally, people who get deluded are people who have really good health. They're exercising regularly. They're eating good. They're young. They're living in a place where there's not much disease. They're using hand sanitizers. They're using all of these things to make sure that they're not afflicted by disease. They're not afflicted by anything, which we should be doing, by the way. Eating good, eating healthy, keeping clean, all of that is very important. But people become deluded by that because they think that death is guaranteed to be far away. But it's not. So other people are generally deluded by average life expectancy. So what's average life expectancy in the area in which you live? 68, 70, something like that. So people assume that, if we focus on average life expectancy, if we focus on that, then what does that mean? It means that we hope and we're probably thinking that we're going to make the same thing. Whereas all you had to do is, if you were to whatever you focus on is whatever motivates you. Right? If you focus on something positive, it's going to motivate you for something positive. If you focus on a negative, it adjusts your mind frame. So the thing is, if you were to focus on the way that people die, how many people died and how they died, right? When there's an outbreak, imagine there's an outbreak of some disease and 1,000 people in Los Angeles County died. How many people are there in Los Angeles? Like 10 million, right? Imagine 1,000 people were infected and they died. This makes headline news. People start getting scared. Should we go outside? Should we not go outside? Why? Average life expectancy didn't change. It's still 68, it's still 70. But you focused on this incident that happened. This amount of people just died because of this. I could go out. What if that guy sneezes on me? What if that guy does something like that? You focus now and you start thinking about death. You start becoming fearful that this can happen to you now, even though the average life expectancy didn't change. So when you start focusing on how many people have been hit by a car while crossing the street, And then you say, you know what? Have I ever crossed the street? Of course I have. Hasn't happened to me yet, but it can happen to me. How many people have died because they were driving just fine and someone broke a red light and hit them? Imagine, just think about this. You're driving down a freeway, or you're driving down some type of highway, right? And everyone's driven on one of these. There's 2 lanes, right? There's 2 lanes, one going this way and one going that way. And there's no barrier in between. All it takes is a few inches move of one car going in the opposite direction, and you have a head-on collision and you're finished. Think about how quickly it can happen. It can happen at any moment. And when you think about that, you reflect that, you know what? You remember death. You start reflecting and saying, if that were to happen to me, would I be listening to the song that I'm listening to right now? Would I be listening to it and say, well, I enjoy it. I enjoy this song, I want to listen to it. Right? It's got some other words and all of that stuff in there. But now, the moment you think, you know what if that guy happened to be drunk right there? Because it's New Year's, and I'm driving down and he just goes like this. Do I still want to keep listening to this song? Or should I change it up? Would I rather listen to something else? Would I be listening to Quran? Or would I be listening to Nasheed? Or would I just turn it off? Would I listen to the news? Or would I change? What would I do? So it changes your behavior, changes your mentality. Think about every single way, every single thing that you can potentially be in a position where you can die. Allah can take your life in any state. In any state, you couldn't even be doing something, and it can happen to you. So this is one of the problems that people, why they have vain hope, the cause is ignorance. It's delusion. It's delusion because they don't focus on all the aspects. They only want to focus on average life expectancy, assuming that everyone else is going to survive, whereas in reality, it's not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed. So what is the cure? The cure is actually very simple, it's very short. The cure for the love of life is to simply increase your belief. Increase your belief and in the promise that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has something waiting for you. Increase your belief in the fact that the Day of Judgment is true. The reason why you're not focusing on it is because your iman is not strong. Your belief in it is not as strong. The more you increase your belief, the stronger you will have that. And for the second one is reflection, as we talked about. Reflect upon the fact that you're not guaranteed to be one of those people. You're not guaranteed to make it into old age. No one is guaranteed it for you. Right? And the opposite is the same. When a doctor comes and guarantees and says that, you know what, you only have 2 months to live. There's no guarantee either. There are people who've lived 10 years. And all the doctors said, guaranteed you only have 2 months. But you actually had 10 years. Allah knows exactly when your time is. It can be this way or it can be that way. The degrees of delusion. So there are categories of people with regards to their delusion. The first is people who want to live for too long. They don't want to even live an average lifespan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions them in the Quran. This is referring to the group of Banu Israel, or the Jews living in Medina. He says every one of them wishes to live 1,000 years or more. And it says it's not going to help them even if they were to do that. But it says they want to live 1,000 years, even though you're not going to be able to live 1,000 years. So there are people who would like to live a very, very long time, and their hope and their delusion is that they act as if they're going to live for that long. Even though in reality, there's no way they're going to live that long. It's very, very, very unlikely that they're ever going to live that long. The second example, the second type of person, are those people who are old, but they want to live for a longer time. And the Prophet ﷺ said that, 2 things, that the old person's heart is young with regards to 2 things. Love of life and love of wealth. So this is another hadith which resembles the previous one. Love of life and love of wealth. So even people who are old, they would like to live for a very, very, very long time. The third category is people who do not expect to live for another year. So these people, what do? They concern themselves with the year to come. So they're planning their expenses, they're planning what they're going to do, they're planning everything. They prepare for the winter during the summer, they prepare for the summer during the winter. They're planning to live for about another year. The fourth category are those people who only expect to live for another day. And they only focus on preparing themselves for that specific day. And then there are people who expect to live for another hour. And they prepare themselves on what they're going to do in that particular hour. And then there are those people who have no expectations at all. They have no expectations at all. And Imam Ghazali says, these are the people who, when they pray as if it was their last prayer. Because they really think that it could be their last prayer. And that's the way we should be praying. Whenever we pray, we pray as if it's their last prayer, but not just as if it's like one of their last prayers, as if it's their last prayer. This is the highest status. And this is the highest status that everyone should try to achieve, to get to, while keeping everything else in mind. It's not just prayer, right? When they eat, it's as if they're eating their last meal. Now for a believer, when you're eating your last meal, what do you focus on? Do you focus on, it's a last meal? No, you don't. The believer, right? The believer doesn't focus on just eating a meal or eating a lot. They focus on the opposite. They focus on, okay, I need to eat this. If it's my last meal, fine. The other meals that are coming, inshallah, are going to be way better than this, so you don't need to worry about it. So a believer acts very, very differently than someone who is acting in a state of heedlessness. When you're not focusing and you're not reflecting, this is a very common thing in life. People, what do they say? If you had one day to live, what would you do? Right? And what do people start thinking? I would go skydiving. And I wanted to go bungee jumping. I wanted to jump off, some building, or I wanted to go and go to Disneyland, or I wanted to go, all of these things. Ask yourself, if you're a believer, if you knew you had one day left, what would you do? What would you do? And what would you do differently? That's what you need to ask yourself. How would you pray? How would you pray differently? Who would you talk to? How would you talk to differently? Where would you go? How much would you sleep? All right, how much would you be planning on sleeping if you knew you had one day left? You would sleep to what you know you would need enough sleep to function for that day. How much would you eat? You would eat enough so you know that you need to function for that day. These are the things you'd be doing. Right? So you need these things, but at the same time, you have to reflect upon what you would really be doing. So the result of giving up vain hope in a person leads them to do good deeds. That's the whole point. Why is this all being discussed? Because it's supposed to have a change in your character. It's supposed to have a change in what you do in your life. And whoever makes the claim that they've given up vain hope, or makes a claim that they're in one of these categories, right? And they act according to the contrary, it shows that they fooled themselves. If somebody says, yes, I'm prepared, I am prepared, and I remember all the time, and they act differently, they act in a different manner which is contrary to what they're saying, then in reality they're only fooling themselves. So what should be done? What is the actual solution? Solution is to rush to perform good deeds. And there's so many different forms of good deeds. There's so many different things you can do. As one scholar mentioned, Sheikh Sabuni, he said, Allah has given us like a rose garden. Not a rose garden, like a garden, whatever you call it, flower garden or something. If all the flowers were just of one color or one kind, it wouldn't be that amazing. But there's different types, and there's different colors, and there's different variations and aspects. The same thing when it comes to worshipping Allah. Our purpose in life is to worship Allah. But the ways in which we worship Allah, there's so many different aspects. It's not just prayer and fasting and pilgrimage and all of giving charity and all of that. So many different ways to worship Allah. So it's been varied so that we don't get tired of doing the same thing over and over again. And that's why we have life the way that it is. So Imam Ghazali asks, imagine you have two guests that are coming to your house. One of them is coming tomorrow, and the other one is coming after a month. Which one would you start preparing for first? The first one, that's coming tomorrow, right? The preparing for the first one should be the main priority in your life. He says this is the same thing when it comes to preparing for death. You take advantage of what you have because you don't know exactly when that guest is coming. You need to be prepared. You need to be prepared. The Prophet ﷺ said, take advantage of 5 states before 5 other states come and replace them. What are they? Number 1, take advantage of your youth before your old age. Because you're not going to be able to do the things that you could have done when you were young, when you're old. You can't do the same things. You can't accomplish the same things. Take advantage of your health before your sickness. So if you're waiting till sickness comes and then you change, you're not going to be able to do the same things. If you say, I'm going to go and I'm going to participate in this great project and everything, once you're ill, you're not going to be able to do the same thing. Number 3, take advantage of your wealth before your poverty. If you decide that, you know what, I need to give 10% or 20% of all my savings in charity, and you decided to do this when you were really wealthy, but you didn't do it. Now when you're poor and you decide, okay, now I'm going to give 20% of my wealth. Is it the same amount of wealth? No. You can't do the same thing that you could have done when you were in that state of wealth. And now that you're in a state of poverty, you say, well, I don't really have much anyways, might as well give up some. It's not even as tempting to you, depending on what type of person you are. So you need to take advantage of that. Take advantage of your free time before you become busy. So those people who say that, well, I don't have time to attend classes or attend the masjid or do something for the sake of Allah. I don't have time because I'm so busy. Well, when you had some free time, what did you do? Well, I was playing a game, or I was going, just enjoying myself, or I was, just working on my car and, tightening up some screws or some random thing. You wasted your own time. Now you don't have time left. You are going to be blamed for the fact that you're so busy now, but you didn't make use of your time. And take advantage of your life before your death, because then it's over. The Prophet ﷺ said something along the same lines. Most people are cheated out of 2 things: health, good health, and free time. Now the question that we'll end with is this. The word that he used was maghboon, which means people are being cheated. They're being ripped off. The question is this: who is cheating you? That's it. That's it. So inshallah, we'll end early today. We'll end with this because we won't be able to finish the next section. Any questions? Yes. The goal is neither to be in either extreme. Yeah. But see, most people fall into which category though? Heedlessness, right? That's the reason why we're focusing so much on this, because most people focus on the other category. That's why. But if you're working in a hospital, and it's happening to you on a regular basis, then yeah, you need to bring yourself back in the balance, inshallah. But consider yourself a little bit luckier, because you're safer. You're safer than the other side. That's a good point. Especially, you should really do that when it comes to not just your family, but your people who you are in a fight with. Because the thing is, you don't want to be in a fight with that person, especially someone who you care about, and you don't want that to be the last state. So when you're leaving them and you're thinking, you know what, we got into this fight and this argument and everything, you know what, let's just put it aside, because I don't know if I'm going to ever see you again, and you're going to have this hatred and resentment towards me forever. And you might be making dua against me and all of these things. That's a good reminder. I mean, the thing is, you can make dua that Allah keeps, you can make a dua that you would like them to be in your life for a little bit longer period of time. But in reality, you can't say that if you know that there's an appointed time, right? You can't say, oh Allah, give them more over their own appointed time, right? So rather, when you're asking for something like that, you're actually asking for more, beneficial experiences for yourself from those people, rather than focusing on the actual age, their age. Otherwise, saying like, may Allah preserve you or someone, that's you can say that. There's nothing wrong with saying that. As long as your intention is not to go against the decree of Allah, then it's fine. I mean, the fearing being put in the ground, if you really focus on it and you think about it, why is that something that should be focusing on in terms of the fear? There's more things to think about, that are more important and more relevant to this than fearing that. It's like fearing somebody who's getting an injection, right? And they're afraid that the needle's going to come inside them. But you should actually be more concerned with what is being injected inside you. Right? So it's the same thing when it comes to judgment. When you die and you're going to be judged, you should be more concerned with what the result of your judgment is actually going to be. So once you think about that, once you know, or you start reflecting on what's inside that syringe, or what's going to be your state, your mind is going to be more occupied with that than the little pinch that you're going to get from the thing. That's a very good point. Another way of remembering death is to help wash a dead body. It's a very, very big thing. And you'd be surprised, I knew a brother who was helping us wash one of the bodies. Brother thinks he's a good brother, but he thinks he's very confident in himself, and I'm this, I'm that, and I'm prepared and everything. and this person, for the first time, had to wash a dead body. This guy who really acts really tough fainted on the spot. He fainted right there. He couldn't stand it. So it's a very humbling experience. It's a very, very humbling experience. So if you can do it, there's something called the Muslim Mortuary Committee. What's it called? Yeah, but what does it stand for? Muslim Mortuary and Cemetery Committee or something like that. Yeah, MMCC. They need volunteers actually to help wash dead bodies, because it takes about 3, 4, 5 people to wash one. So if you ever want to volunteer, contact them, and it's a very, very good experience. In fact, we can make it an extra credit assignment. Willing to give like a few points if you go and you wash one of the dead bodies, inshallah ta'ala. So let me know if you do it, and we can give you some points, inshallah. Yes. The balance is just to know when it's good to be shy and when it's not. That's the thing. So it's not a level. It should never be consistent. It shouldn't be constant. It should be in this state you're shy, and in this state you're aggressive. All right. So it's not about it should never be constant. That's really the root of the problem. That's why people can't find the balance, because they're saying, well, which level should I be at? Well, you shouldn't be at the same level in every circumstance. That's the difference. Hopefully that helps. Helps you to balance it. Actually, all right. So when it mentions that, it's just describing that Allah is not ashamed to give this example or to teach this thing or whatever it may be. So it's just an example. Especially this was used in the beginning of the Quran, where someone said people were complaining that the Quran uses examples of spiders and ants and like different small animals, bees and all of that. So some of the people, who are non-believers, they were complaining, how can Allah use these little tiny, useless things and mention them in the Quran? That's a defect. So Allah responded, Allah is not shy to use an example of any of these things, meaning that He's not ashamed to use these type of things. There's no shame in these things. So this is the type of response that He's giving, to clarify. Is the name mentioned Allah anywhere else? Yeah. The thing is, in Aramaic, the word Allah or Ella are both the words for Allah. Aramaic, the original language of Prophet Jesus. So that's so it's mentioned. It's a Semitic word. So even in Aramaic, the word Allah is very very, very close. You find it's very, very close.
How do you pronounce it?
It's Ella or Allah. Yeah, there's a Bible you can get. It's called the Schofield Study Bible. It's very. I wouldn't recommend buying it, because we shouldn't support them. But you can download it or something like that.
The reason is because a lot of Christians nowadays
I know they think it's a different God and there's no word for it or something. They made up this ridiculous thing. Just check something called the Schofield Study Bible. I'll tell you what happened. So what happened was they made this study Bible, and right in the beginning, the first verse, it describes what the word God means in Aramaic, and it says Allah or Ella in the first version of Schofield Bible. And what happened afterwards is that when people realized, the Christians started realizing that this sounds like Allah, then the Muslims are going to start saying this. Mr. Schofield, in his second edition, removed that footnote completely. So if you find the first version of the Schofield Bible, you'll find it there. And you can say, well, why did you remove it from the second version? Because you're trying to conceal from other people that there's a connection between the two. Okay, inshallah. So we'll conclude here. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Wa salamun ala al-mursaleen. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum.